The sad news came as usual at the most unexpected moment. The phone rang. It was the village chairman, where Igor hadn't appeared for over 5 years. Not because he was too busy or the village was too far away. He simply had no connection to this place, except for his grandfather, who lived there. But, by twist of fate, the somber voice on the phone announced that today he was no more, and Igor needed to come for the funeral. Since the day of the funeral fell on a Saturday, there were no difficulties with that. Moreover, Igor was the only heir, and he had to sign documents for the right of ownership. And so on the appointed day, waking up early, he got dressed and got into his old Chrysler and set off. The road there takes no more than an hour, and even then, because the condition of the road does not allow you to gain a decent speed. The old wooden crooked house evoked notes of nostalgia. Almost nothing has changed since time immemorial. His gaze fell on the blue lid of the coffin standing at the entrance. Grandmothers passing by crossed themselves. Everyone looked very worried. Igor, having opened the creaky wooden gate, leisurely walked to the house, the door of which was open. In his nose struck the smell of garlic, which for some reason was hung at all windows and doors. "Good day." A low, loud voice was heard. Right by the coffin stood a hefty priest, and next to him was the village chairman, nervously twirling Orthodox prayer beads in his hand. "Who are you to the deceased?" Unexpectedly for himself, the guy replied with a trembling voice. The priest and the chairman exchanged mysterious glances. Silence hung in the air. Finally, the chairman, having filled his lungs with air, spoke. "You know, they called from the notary's office recently. They said they could come no earlier than tomorrow." Igor nodded approvingly, and looking at the body of the deceased lying in the coffin, left the room. Strangely enough, the grandfather, from his memories, had nothing to do with the person lying in the coffin. Time does its job. Right on the threshold, he almost collided with another tearful old woman, who probably came to say goodbye. Apologizing, he was about to move on, when suddenly his attention was drawn to the barely audible muttering coming from the grieving woman's lips. What? What will happen to us now? To us? To all of us? It was no longer audible as she turned the corner. Well, thought Igor. Apparently everyone here knows each other. Or maybe Grandpa was a jack of all trades. Stepping outside and lighting a cigarette, he noticed that quite a few locals had gathered around the house. Old men and women, almost all who remained to live in this remote village. The time has come. A familiar bass voice sounded behind him, making way and letting in 3 not entirely decrepit, but still elderly men and one very young lad, about 15 years old. Igor glanced once again at all the gathered people. Absolutely all of them were crying and crossing themselves. They were all dressed in black. It all looked very strange. After all, these people, they weren't even relatives. Why were they so devastated? The same 4 men carried the coffin, covering it with the lid beforehand, and carried it towards the cemetery, located right behind the village. The crowd followed in procession. The noise from crying and prayers became louder, which gave Igor a serious headache. He wanted to finish all this as soon as possible and leave this strange place, although he felt somewhat ashamed of his indifference. During the funeral, each mourner approached and threw a handful of soil, whispering something. Igor stood indifferently on the sidelines. Only at the very end did he dare to approach and, touching the coffin, mentally bid farewell and ask for forgiveness for not appearing here for so long. "Young man," an elderly woman's voice sounded behind him. "You are the grandson of the respected Valentin, aren't you? Oh, what a blessing that you are here. Tell me, will you now take his place and continue his work?" Right? Igor looked at her with surprise. "What? What are you talking about? What business?" A man approached the woman from behind, apparently her husband, and taking her hand, began to lead her away. She changed her expression. But if not you, then who? Who is capable of this now?" Despair and anger flashed in her eyes. Igor wiped the sweat from his forehead and quickly headed towards his grandfather's house, next to which he had parked his car. This just can't be. Igor exclaimed aloud, looking at the slashed tires. The rubber looked as if it had been gnawed. From around the corner of the house emerged the chairman, with a mysterious look on his face. In his hand were the Orthodox prayer beads, which he nervously played with. Looking at the tires and shaking his head disapprovingly, he addressed the boy. Well, it seems like you didn't waste any time causing trouble." "What? The only people I talked to were you and the priest. What the hell is going on here? Hey, it looks like the local scoundrels are having fun. Well, be that as it may, it's fixable. Tomorrow at noon, Mark will come from the city. He has his own workshop nearby. He'll fix everything for you in no time. Meanwhile, feel at home. Well, now this is probably your home. Tomorrow at noon, but I need to leave today. Can I somehow leave today? Are there any buses here?" "The only bus leaves at noon, and it left a few hours ago. So whether you like it or not, you're spending the night here. And besides, the notary will come tomorrow and read the will." "I don't give a damn about the will. I'm leaving today, right now." Igor took out his cell phone, found the taxi number in the phone book, and pressed the call button. Silence. Is this some kind of joke? He looked at the display, which showed no connection. How do you live here? Igor put the phone in his pocket and sadly looked towards the house. He realized he would have to spend the night. All day, sitting in the garlic-scented house, he received guests. It seemed that all the local grannies and grandpas decided to visit him with their condolences, and almost everyone looked at Igor with hope in their eyes. It's just completely unclear what they wanted. The priest entered the house, looking more agitated than the others. "Igor, so you're staying here until tomorrow?" The guy nodded approvingly in response. The priest closed the door to the room. "Listen to me carefully. However strange what you're about to hear may sound, you must do exactly as I tell you. Do you understand me? After 11 o'clock, it's strictly forbidden to leave the house, especially this one. Do not remove the garlic from the windows under any circumstances," listing all his instructions. He seemed unable to keep up with his own thoughts. Igor sat opposite him, staring at him with glassy eyes. "No matter what you hear or see, stay in the house. Just stay here, and then in the morning you can leave home peacefully. Do you understand me?" He grabbed the guy by the shoulders and shook him several times. There was a knock on the door. Another visitor came to visit the poor guy. The priest got up from his chair, crossed Igor, and left the house. The clock on the car radio showed 10:45 when the guy sat in his car and listened to the radio, as there was absolutely nothing to do in the house, and it was the only place where he could hide from the annoying locals. Despite the stress he had been through, he still managed to doze off. A pleasant, soothing melody came from the speakers. No one bothered him. Igor's head was filled with memories of the eventful day. First, how strange everything that was happening here was. Then memories from early childhood flooded in. How he and his grandfather used to go fishing. How he used to build a wooden treehouse for him. It made him feel a little sad and ashamed. The buzzing radio wave made him open his eyes. "What the hell is wrong with this car?" Igor muttered tiredly, reaching his finger towards the button on the receiver, freezing in place. His gaze stopped on the dark silhouette of a person standing a few meters from the car, right in the middle of the road. In a black hat and a long coat, occasionally swaying. With his whole body, Igor felt that this someone was looking right at him. Goosebumps ran over his body, but as he opened the car door and leaned out, inhaling deeply, he shouted, "Holy Father, is that you?" As expected, there was no response. Someone remained out of place. Igor squinted, trying to make out the stranger. But suddenly, what he saw seemed to turn everything inside him upside down. He wasn't sure about it, and perhaps he imagined it altogether, but something large and slimy, protruding as if from a mouth, hanging down to the stomach, twitched and withdrew. as if a huge black tongue had plunged into the oral cavity. Sitting back in the car and automatically locking all the doors, Igor noticed the time. 11:03. As if a bullet had pierced his head, he remembered his last meeting with the priest and what he had said. But this is just nonsense. It looks like an extremely unsuccessful joke. With trembling hands, he raised his eyes again and pulled the handle that turned on the high beams. No one. There was nothing in the place where someone had just stood. The distance to the house was about 20 meters. Igor looked towards the porch. The gate was wide open. He also noticed that in all the houses where the lights had recently been on, darkness now reigned. The entire village seemed to be submerged in thick black paint. Opening the door, and without hesitating for a second, Igor rushed out of the car and ran towards his grandfather's house. Reaching the gate and running into the yard, his foot caught on something, and he almost fell flat on the grass. Getting up, now limping heavily, he continued towards the house. And then, reaching the very door, opening it, and about to step inside, a terrible loud metallic screech sounded behind him, causing Igor to freeze and slowly turn his trembling head. Someone, still in the same hat and long coat, standing next to his car, slowly, with claws protruding from his fingertips, was dragging them along the body, leaving scratches and emitting that disgusting screech. Igor's heart was pounding like crazy. It was like a terrible dream. Overcoming himself and finally stepping inside the room, closing the door behind him, he, still limping, went into the room. What to do he didn't know. So he just sat down against the wall on the floor and waited for morning. It was unknown how much time had passed, but either from exhaustion or from the shock he had experienced, Igor managed to doze off. Knock, knock. A faint knock slowly began to pull him out of sleep. Knock, knock, it repeated again, and the guy finally opened his eyes. Silence. Getting up and looking around, not finding the source of the sound, Igor pulled out his cell phone again. There was still no connection. It was 4:15 on the clock. And that means it will soon be light, and for some reason he was sure it would all be over. And since no one had disturbed him so far, then apparently the priest was right. Knock, knock. The knocking came again from the right side of Igor, coming from the window. The guy turned his head and his legs gave out beneath him. Collapsing to the floor, he crawled back to the wall, never taking his eyes off the window. Knock, knock, a long, bony finger, with a claw instead of a regular human nail, tapped against the glass. And beside it, in a gray, tattered hat, staring straight at him, he saw the face of that creature. The fierce gaze of the gray, unnatural face sent shivers down Igor's spine. The horror he felt made it hard to breathe. With its long black tongue, it licked the glass, leaving visible slime even in the darkness, and slowly pulled its head away. The knocking repeated again, but this time from the front door. Then again on the ceiling. With every noise, every sound of the monster's presence, Igor nervously flinched and directed his frightened gaze towards the source of the sound. This continued until dawn, but with the first rays of sunlight, everything fell silent. A knock on the door came when the windows were already flooded with bright sunlight. It wasn't those demonstrative knocks meant to scare. It was the real, human knock, followed by the deep bass of the priest. "Is anyone alive in there?" Igor, rising on shaky legs, approached the door. After a minute's hesitation, right up to the next loud knock, he opened the door. The light hit him in the face, almost causing him to fall to the ground as he squinted. The priest, with a stern look, glanced at the guy. From his glance, it was immediately clear that no explanations were needed here. He already knew everything. "So, he did come after all," he said quietly, entering the house. "It's a good thing he didn't get to you." "What? Who? Who was that?" Igor croaked in a plaintive voice, rising. "A monster. A demon. The curse of our village. A predator that hunts every night." Didn't you notice that we have practically only old men and women here? After what it did to Maria's 7-year-old daughter, he trailed off, but taking a deep breath, he continued. Everyone who could left this accursed God-forsaken place and took their children with them. But why don't you leave yourselves? Igor froze with a questioning look on his face. Because we're the only thing keeping it here, and yesterday we lost the last hunter who fought back, who restrained the beast. What will happen to us now? The clergyman shook his head, gesturing towards the street. The notary came. I don't think it's a surprise for you. Now this is your home and your land. The documents are in order. You need to sign them. Oh, and this is for you too. He handed him an old rusty key on a heavily worn string. I have no idea what it is. Your car is ready. You can leave this place. With that, he left the house. Igor, once again surveying the room, having no idea what to do with all this, prepared to step outside. A wooden board under his left foot emitted a quiet but attention-grabbing squeak. It was the cellar. After some hesitation, Igor finally closed the front door and, with difficulty, managed to open the cellar door. Beneath it was another door. Or rather, a metal hatch locked with a padlock. It wasn't hard to guess that the same key the priest gave him would fit this lock. Turning it, there was a quiet metallic creak, and the passage was opened. Uncertainly, down the steep iron stairs, Igor descended. Feeling for the switch on the wall, he flicked it, and the room was illuminated with bright light. The walls of the small underground room were densely adorned with various equipment, the significance of which, after what he had seen, wasn't hard to guess. A crossbow, an old Soviet-era pistol, transparent glass balls with Orthodox crosses drawn on them, wire mesh, garlic cloves, a double-barreled shotgun. Igor's head spun with surprise. Just the day before, he was living a normal life, going to work, meeting girls, going to clubs. And now, a mystery of immense magnitude had fallen upon his shoulders. Stepping outside, he saw that his car was indeed ready to depart. The only reminder of the terrible night was 3 scratches on the driver's door. Gathering himself but not quite managing to take a step, his gaze fell on something dark gray lying in the bushes. Igor leaned over. Realizing what it was, echoed with the feeling of all-encompassing fear he experienced during the night. They were wooden Orthodox prayer beads, the same ones that annoyingly twirled around the chairman of this village. Tucking the find into his pocket, he re-entered the house and locked both cellar doors. With a confident stride, the guy stepped out onto the street, got into the car, started it up, and parked it on the house's property. Closing the gate behind him, he caught the surprised gaze of the same priest standing on the other side of the road. Not loudly, almost to himself, with a confident voice, Igor said, "I'm staying."